Hello, this is Maroof Raza, and I'm going to give you my regular update on an issue of world affairs that concerns the world, particularly India. And in this case, we're going to talk about Mr. Modi's successful visit to Moscow. Now, Moscow has traditionally been India's major strategic partner and an extremely reliable one that India could go to in the event of a crisis, whether it was during the Kargil conflict, whether it was during the Chinese intrusions on the LAC, and in the past, in the 1971 war, Russia standing with India turned the tide in India's favor to a great extent. So, what were the expectations from Mr. Modi's visit this time to Moscow? One was the fact that India and Russia have had a very deep and strong strategic and a defense relationship. Now, this goes into purchase of arms systems. This goes into India jointly manufacturing weapons platforms, from aircrafts to submarines to ships and missiles. And this aspect is something that gives India a lot of heft as far as its defense standing goes. The second thing that really of interest to India, and which is something that India has been now working very hard on, is buying Russian crude oil. Russia is one of the largest producers of oil and crude, and India has exploited the situation sensibly after the embargoes placed on Russian products with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But India's oil trade has come under criticism by some economists to say that India's economy is very heavily dependent now on Russian products, particularly oil and crude, and the trade balance is completely skewed in Russia's favor. But to understand, let's look at one other aspect. India has more tensions and adversity with China. And with China, our trade balance for decades or more has been 2/3 in China's favor and 1/3 in our favor. So it's not a bad thing that if we continue to import Russian crude, particularly when we're getting it at a good bargain price, at the same time, if India was to go back to increasing its requirements from the Middle East, where it traditionally buys a lot of oil from, then India would end up upsetting the price regime in the world market. And that is something I'm sure that the world, and especially the European countries, would not look favorably at. So what is the West and the United States and its European allies worried about India and Russia? They are worried about the fact that India is taking Indo-US relationship for granted and leaning extensively towards Russia. India has its own strategic reasons. One of them is to keep Russia on the good side, is to balance out Russia's leaning towards China, which, if Russia and China combine, could present a much bigger threat to India and Asia than any other two country combined could do. The second aspect which the West is worried about is that India is going to flout some of the arrangements it has with the Western countries, particularly things like the Quad. But the fact of the matter is that India is known to respect its treaties, respect its arrangements with countries, and the US should know that better than anybody else. Now, where does India and Russia's relationship take us from here? Firstly, Mr. Modi has made arrangements and got into an agreement with the Russians to increase bilateral trade to a target of about $100 billion in next 6 to 7 years by 2030, and that is a figure that will come close to what India's trade with the United States is. That trade will be leaning more towards Russia because Russia provides a hell of a lot of oil and crude to India, which is a requirement for a country which has ambitious economic targets. The other aspect is that we are allowed to trade with Russia in our currency and trade with products, bilateral trade. So in that case, we don't do away with well earned foreign exchange reserves, and this amount is kept aside for our engagement with the West, which is not willing to do product to product or bilateral trade. We need fertilizers from Russia, we need technology from Russia, we need Russia to give us the satellite intelligence that we need to deal with our two troublesome neighbors, China and Pakistan. And we need Russia to stand with us in the UN Security Council. The other aspect that Russia has been providing India and will do so is basically space technology. That is something that India has been jointly doing with Russia, and some of us might remember that Wing Commander Rakesh Sharma, the first Indian to go into space, went in with Indo-Russian collaboration. So with America, while relationship requires a transactional behavioral pattern, with Russia, it's very clearly, if Russia decides to engage with you, it gives you what it can without too many arguments. And finally, Mr. Modi has been awarded Russia's highest civilian award, and this is something that again irks the West, but many of them have also awarded him their highest civilian award. So the big question the West must ask its friends and its allies, whether in the Gulf countries or elsewhere in the world, that why is it that you awarded Modi